when I saw the movie, I couldn't exactly say what was so familiar about the movie, about these wild psychedelic scenes, but there's something very comforting and familiar about it. And so I opened this Haggadah up, and of course now I see that these are images that I've probably seen as a child, but I just assumed that they were every Haggadah. This is a Sinai Haggadah. This is the Haggadah that God gave the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. It never occurred to me this is, the genius of one man who tried to, as Rabbi Blazer has said, to regenerate an ancient Jewish art form, which is the illustrated manuscript.
When writer and director Sal Litvak phoned me a few years ago, and he told me about his interest of using the Szyk Haggadah in his movie, and about how much he had loved it and remembered its colors from his youth, I was very, very excited, because what he mentioned is that he envisioned this tent, and that this tent would have the colors of Szyk's Haggadah in it. And when I eventually saw the movie, I knew exactly the images that Sal, you were speaking of, and it was this image of the father sitting at the table, and I saw it in Szyk's Haggadah. This image came alive for me in the way in which it was portrayed, but I think this was the backdrop and the colors is what you initially excited you, and then reinvigorated me when I had the opportunity to see this in your movie.
Yes, I mean, we've just sat here this afternoon, and we've heard a discussion by the rabbis about the movie and about the Szyk Haggadah in particular. Rabbi Schwartz mentioned this illustration as standing out to him.
I noticed that there's one illustration of the old man presiding over the Seder in his white top hat, and his white cantorial hat, and his robe, his kittel, and his full beard. He looks very saintly. And to his right is sitting his son, slick, goatee, tie. To his right is sitting his son, who's already without a yarmulke, without any external trappings of the Jewish description. It's sort of the degeneration of the generations are going around.
This is my copy that my great-grandfather, Gregorio Oxman, and my son is named after. He bought it in Israel, and I think he gave it to me when I was either 7 or 8 years old. We didn't use it at Passover, because we didn't have 10 copies of it or 20 copies of it. We just had the supermarket Haggadahs. But it always had a very important spot on my shelf. And then, many years later, Nina and I are writing this movie, and I'm talking about how it has to be cinematic. Yes, it takes place at a dinner party, but it can't feel like a play. It has to have real elements of cinema. And so much so that when this movie, God willing, will play every year at Passover on TV, and people are just turning channels, or around Passover, they should be watching TV that night, but anyway, that they're just flipping channels and they come upon this movie, and if they come up somewhere in the middle of the movie, they'll know right away it's When Do We Eat. I really wanted it to have a distinctive look. And I was thinking, what is going to be the look of the film? And then immediately this book flashed into my mind, and especially this image, which is the Manish Tana image.
Right, the 4 questions.
How is this night different from all other nights? And that's the whole thing, that this night must be different from all other nights. And of course, if you've seen the movie, this image literally comes alive for Ira once he gets into that space. And so while I had this Haggadah, when Nina and I started looking at these pictures and said, okay, this is it. This is going to be the visual scheme of the movie. It's going to be the color scheme. These images themselves, when we get into Ira's visions, will be a touchstone for him, and he'll see his family in this book, etc. And so I said, okay, great, it'll be based on this book. And then it was Nina who said, my wife, my co-writer, who said, well, who drew those things? who did that book? And it was only then, for the first time in my life, having had the Haggadah for decades, that I said, oh, Arthur Szyk, and later Artur, because he is a Polish Jew. And that's when I started learning about Szyk, and I'm just an amateur collector, but I really love this man's work, and he's come to really mean a lot to me. So not only that his work really infuses my film, but I don't know, I just feel some kind of personal connection with him, especially when I've heard, my mother was a Hungarian Jew who passed through a concentration camp. My grandmother carried her through, my grandfather was killed. And so there's this connection to me for the old world that, he survived and got to America. I don't know, it's very special to me.
It's not uncommon for people to have been using Szyk's Haggadah for all these years and not know it was Szyk. This is another version of it which many people have seen with the blue velvet cover. You have one with the metal cover. What I'm holding in my hand here is actually the one of 250 copies that were printed as the first edition of this book, which has a history that is just absolutely amazing. I mean, this book, when it was printed, was not printed on paper. It was printed on vellum. It was printed on parchment, like the skin of an animal. And when it appeared, the Times of London wrote about this, that this book is worthy of being considered among the most beautiful of books ever produced by the hand of man. And I mean, Szyk had already achieved, great fame in Europe. He was a Polish Jew. He was born in 1894. He studied as a teenager in France, in Paris, and also then back in Krakow. But the timing of Szyk's working on this, and how he attempted to see the parallels between the taskmasters of ancient Egypt and the new taskmasters who were on the horizon as the Nazis, and how he saw Hitler as the modern pharaoh in his own time, was translated through his art, where he began to, while he drew these parallels, he began to literally draw them, where he made like the wicked son that we've spoken about earlier, that we've heard the rabbis speak about.
The most disturbing image for us as Jews is really the wicked or rebellious child here in the Haggadah. Of the four sons, he's the one that is most jarring, because he's dressed in a very, not just German garb, but even has a mustache, which is suggestive of Hitler.
The riding boots and the whip that he carried, how he painted the Egyptians with swastikas, and also a swastika on the armband of the wicked son, which, by the way, when this book was taken to the publishers in Czechoslovakia and in Poland, no one would touch it and publish it with those symbols. And ultimately, when this book was published in London, those symbols had to be removed for various reasons, because the publishers just felt uncomfortable, publishing the book in that fashion. I think one of the things we might also pay attention to is that Szyk has painted a snake in the upper right-hand corner, a serpent, and when Szyk sat down to paint this, many of the snakes and tigers in the Haggadah had swastikas on their backs, and these also had to be removed as well. But here you see it's almost lurking.
Right, that's connecting the political dimension for me to the mystical dimension. As long as a father and son are communicating and are learning together, I would say the snake is kept at bay. But when these issues get buried, when a family doesn't communicate, that's when that snake is going to come through, as the evil inclination in any individual. For me, that's just a beautiful thing. And of course, the kid is reading a Haggadah, right? So this is the Haggadah within the Haggadah. To me, that's Passover, as this opportunity to have that communication, that can keep the snakes at bay. Or it can become a missed opportunity.
I am but a Jew, praying in art. If I have succeeded in any measure, if I have gained the power of reception among the elite of the world, I owe it all to the teachings, to the traditions, and the eternal virtues of my people Israel.